Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today I'm going to be painting a Druid Ranger sort of thing. I think officially, according to some people who actually play D&D, it's a Druid, but I think you could pass it off as a Ranger pretty easily. I'm going to be painting him sort of stereotypical Druid, at least what appears in my head when I think of that. And then we'll do a forest base on him at the end. The only thing I've done so far is I textured the base with just some texture paint. Then I sprayed the whole miniature black, and then I did zenithal white from above, so we have some shadows. And the first thing we're going to do is address those shadows. So I'm going to cover most of the miniature in Skeleton Horde. This is a pretty weak brown paint, but what it will do is tone the whole miniature brown and help, especially with the shadows, to appear brown. And then the question would be, well, why didn't you just undercoat your miniature with brown instead of using black for your zenithal? And well, the reason for that is because we still want our shadows to be dark, like the black is going to give us, but adding this brown will just shade them slightly, tint the shadows sort of a brown color. And that's what we want. We want the shadows to be warm, but we don't want the shadows to just be purely brown. That's not really what shadows look like. They take on the color of what's under them to a greater or lesser extent, but they're not typically just straight brown. So black will work a little better, and then we're just going to tint them. So I'm just going to do that all over the miniature. Not quite all over. Like on the sword, I'm not going to bother. And I might not do it on the cloak. We'll see. But everywhere else, we're going to do it. Oh, I'm going to avoid the face also. I want the face to stick out from the rest of the miniature. And so for that reason, I'm going to leave that as a pretty dark black shadow without any brown tint to it. And if you don't have the contrast paint, you can do this with one of many things. You could use some just brown ink wash. You could use watered down brown paint. You could use all sorts of stuff. And really, in a pinch, if you had none of those things, you could just spray the miniature brown and then do a zenithal with white. I just prefer doing it this way. Definitely not the only way to do it. I just realized I'm using a incredibly small brush for this process. Get a bigger brush here, and we can go a little faster. I'm making sure to put this on not super thick, so I want to be able to put other colors over top of this without the brown overpowering them. So basically I'm just going to do everything except the sword and the face. And if I miss a couple spots, it's not the end of the world, since all of this is going to get painted over anyway. Alright, there we go. So there's our undercoat done. Now we're going to start in with some of our actual colors. And I think I'll start with all this leather and stuff in front. And for that, we're going to use snakebite leather. So I'm just going to paint all these little like scabbards or pouches or whatever they happen to be in this color. Got some straps hanging down there. I'll paint them also. This, I think, is part of his tunic, so I won't paint that. These belts, though, I will paint. And this is a pouch for something, I think. Maybe bird food for his little buddy here. And then he's got some sort of stick or maybe another sword. Or maybe it's a scabbard for his sword, I'm not sure. That actually could be what this is. It's just one of the... It's either a full scabbard under his cloak, or it's just a little... Not sure what you'd call it, but just a ring of leather basically to throw the sword into. Alright. That looks about right. Looks like he's got some leather potentially over his shoulders up here, so I'm going to do them in this color also. There we go. And then he's probably got some leather up here around his wrist. And it's hard to tell exactly what's on this wrist over here, but I'm going to paint this full thing here. And I think his hands are bare, so I'll leave those. Alright. So then I'm going to paint this front thing that I said I wasn't going to paint in leather color. I'm going to use orc flesh for this. I want the green to be pretty heavy on this guy, because he is like supposed to be interacting with the forest and stuff a lot, so just trying to see where his cloak ends and this begins. I think this is over that. We'll do it that way. That looks good to me. So then I'm going to use, let's see here. Just trying to make sure I save some colors. I don't want to use every color I have on him, because I want to save some colors out for the base. So I'm just trying to keep that in mind as I'm painting him. So we'll leave those out. And there we go. Alright, so I've left 3 browns out for my base. So we will now go in and we can start using the rest of these. So for this, I'm going to use Creed Camo. It's a little bit of a darker green and less pigmented green. And I'm just going to do the undershirt here, at least what I think is an undershirt. As you can see, it's a more muted green. It's not as eye-popping as the first one. I'm going to paint this tunic down here in this color. And then his sleeves in this color. It's sort of hard to tell on this miniature what exactly is what. It's one of the older Bones miniatures, so they weren't the highest fidelity miniatures, but that's okay. We'll muddle through. As long as something gets a color on it at the end of the day, that's really all you need. So there's that. So then we've got his main cloak. I'm going to do this in Nazdreg yellow. It's sort of a yellowish brownish color. I want that to stick out from the rest of the miniature. I don't want just the whole miniature to be brown and green. This will still be in the brown family. And because it's yellow, it's sort of adjacent to green. So it'll still work with the color scheme, but it'll help the miniature pop a little bit. And I'm going to make sure to get the part of the cloak that's up by his shoulders also in just a second. Up here. All right. So there's that just slightly brighter color to help him stand out just a little bit. So let's see what we have left. We have basically all of the legs and the bird and then the sword. All right, I'm going to do the skin. I'm going to do that in Guilliman Flesh Tone. It's the least pigmented version of skin tone in the contrast range. I want him to be a little bit pale, but still have some color to his skin. So this will work out well for that. The color itself may not look like it's a pale skin tone, but the primer and the zenithal that we did underneath this showing through will help show that. At least that's the plan. Alright, so that's the first part. Oh, we have his hair to do also. Alright, so then I'm going to do... He's got like some armor possibly here. And then his boots. I'm going to do those in the same color. I'm going to do those in Militarum Green. Give this a good shake, because it's been sitting for a little while. And if you're using contrast paint, this is how you can tell if you need to shake your contrast paint more. This is either the binder or the medium. I'm not actually sure. It's one of the components of the contrast paint. You just want to make sure most of that is gone off the bottom before you use it, because otherwise your paint won't flow correctly. Alright, so there, as you can see, all shaken up now. And I'm just going to put those on the legs. There we go. Alright. Then I'm just going to tidy up the hair a little bit. I think we're going to use the skeleton horde that we put on before as the hair color. So I'm just going to tidy up the couple spots that didn't get color on them. That'll be his hair color. Then for the bird, I'm going to use Darkoath Flesh. It's sort of a light red sort of color. And that'll contrast with the green nicely. We might need to add just a little bit of another red, just to deepen it up a little bit. Because the red and green are complementary colors to each other. So this will help give the miniature some contrast. No pun intended, since I am using contrast paint. Alright, so we are definitely going to have to use some other color, and I think I'm going to use volupus pink for this. I'm just going to put it on a couple places on the bird. Technically not a red, but it's close enough, and over this brown it will help show the bird as red. At least more red than he is right now. Just going to put that in a couple places. Maybe on this big crest of his. Not exactly sure what this bird is supposed to be, if it's supposed to be a real bird at all. But there we go. Alright, so then I'm going to go ahead and start doing the metal. And in my mind, a druid is going to have a lot of golds and coppers. Not going to be necessarily having silver on him. So I'm going to start with my go-to gold, which is Necro Gold. Just going to give that a good shake. And I'm just going to do basically all the little buttons that are on him in this color. I'm going to do the hilt of his sword in this color. And what I think is supposed to be a little watch, like a pocket watch or something, in this color. Let's get another dagger there. Some buttons here. The blade of the sword will be silver, just because it's one of the most common colors you see swords in. But everything else is going to be in gold. And possibly some bronze thrown in if we get feisty. Got some filigree or something here on the boots. So I'll paint that in. Got a couple little buttons here and looks like a carabiner type thing. And get the back of the sword. Okay, that looks good. Don't see any more immediately jumping out at me. Alright, so then I'm going to take some of this Tesseract Glow, which is a very bright green. I'm just going to put it in a couple places around the miniature just to make it seem sort of like there's maybe some magical energy flowing around this guy, or you know, something else is going on with this magical dude. Just getting my paint nice and mixed up. This paint does have a tendency to separate, so I'm just making sure it's all good to go. There we go. Alrighty. And then, I'm just going to put it in a couple places just to brighten up some areas. And one spot I'm definitely going to do it is on the tips of his hair. His boots a little bit over here. And then I'm also going to do it on his eyes. And so by leaving the primer of the black, or the black primer in there, we'll get more of a contrast between these glowing eyes and the surrounding face. Alright, so there's that. I'm just going to now highlight the skin just a little bit. Use Kislev flesh for that. And I'm just going to do a couple things like the nose, the cheekbones, the upper lip, and then the fingers. Nothing crazy, but just something to differentiate it from the surrounding browns. I think this is supposed to be his ear sticking up, so I'll do that also. Guess this guy's an elf, huh? Fair enough. Alright. So then I'm just going to do the silver. I'm going to use a pretty dark silver on this guy. Iron Warriors in this case. And then we'll move on to the base, and then I'll do the final, since we want these layer paints to dry before we do anything else. I'm going to move on to the base and then come back and finish up the model itself. Just make sure to get all of the sword here, including the back. At least all that anyone's ever going to see. That looks good. Alright. So now, like I said, we're going to move on to the base. So I'm going to use a couple different things for the base. I'll prop this guy up while I'm talking about basing material. So I'm going to use some of this stuff, which is like it's like flocking, sort of, but it's in this like mesh sort of structure, so you can pull it apart and stuff. I'm going to use it for leaves on a tree, or a little bush thing. I'm going to use some fish tank plants I got at the pet store. A little twig thing. I think this one's 3D printed. I know this one's 3D printed. But normally what I'd use is just some sticks from the yard. They work great. And then I'm going to use some Green Stuff World leaf scatter, basically. It's leaves. So, I'm going to start by gluing on our little twig here. If I can find my glue. Here it is. So I'm just going to take it, get a little bit of glue, maybe. There we go. A little bit of glue on it. And you don't want to distract from your miniature, but you do want to still be able to see this. So because this bird is up high, I'm going to put the thing here right about there, I think. And that way the bird, it won't block the bird. It won't, if you put it over here, it'll block the sword. I don't want that. And I think there's a little too much paint on the sword right here. There we go. So you don't want to block the sword. You don't want to block the bird. So right there is a perfect spot. And sticking out from the side of the miniature like that, sort of, I heard some painter call it breaking the fourth wall. I'm not sure if that really makes sense. But it might be in the miniature's fourth wall technically breaking that. I'm not sure. But in any event, so I'm going to start with Cygro Brown. And this is going to be the dirt color. So I'm just going to put this all over the base of the miniature. Being careful to avoid the actual miniature, but also making sure to get down in all the cracks and crevices of the base. So we don't want any of this white showing through. And I'm just going to go, since I glued this little stick on afterward, I'm going to do that part last because I don't want any super glue getting in the bristles of my brush. So I'm just going to do everything else and then work my way back to it. And I'm using a fairly small brush here because my texture is rather bumpy, and so there's a lot of little ups and downs in it that I want to make sure the paint gets in. And with a larger brush I might miss some of those spots. Just make sure to get it all down here. Super glue should be dry by now. So then we're going to go on to this. Actually, no, we're not going to go on to the stick. We'll get to the stick in a minute, but after this step, we're going to do some other stuff. Alright, so then once we have that all over the miniature, I'm just going to go back and make sure there's wet paint sort of all over it. Don't want to miss any spots. And then we're going to take our leaf litter and we're going to put our miniature over something so we can collect the excess leaves. And then we're just going to sprinkle some of this leaf litter onto our base. Just like this, and we're going to pat it down. Put some. Alright, and then we just tap off the excess. That won't dry immediately, but it will dry soon enough. Just blow off the extra, maybe put a little bit more down, tap it down there. Alright, that should be good. Just get any of the stuff that isn't sticking real good on there. Alright. So now we just have some sort of leaves or, you know, rotted plants or whatever on there. So then I'm going to take some of this Plague Bearer Flesh contrast paint. And I'm just going to put it down on top of these leaves. This will just help keep them on the base, but also change the color of them just a little bit. I'm not going to do it on all of them, just on some of them. Just sort of dot it in there. Just to get some more color variance on the leaves. There we go. Alrighty. Then I'm going to take some of these pet store plant things and just going to grab a couple that look like they could be sort of fern looking things. Just cut them off with some nippers. Okay. 3 ought to do. Then I'm just going to take a drop of super glue again. And I think I'll put this one right here. Looks to be a pretty clear spot on the base, so just put a drop of super glue there. And then grab these with my tweezers. Just going to set them in like this. Probably not going to stand up. That's okay. have to wait. There we go. That's okay. And then the last one, I'm going to put in right here. Good. So there, now we have a little plant sort of structure right there. And we'll have to come back and put some paint on that in just a second. But first, we're going to go ahead and attach some of this mesh stuff to the tree, or the little bush thing. So I'm just going to take off a chunk kind of like this. Make sure all the little strands are off of it. And then I'm just going to sort of set it. Oh, all the strands are not off of it. Just going to cut them off with an X-Acto. That should be all of them. Oh, one more. There we go. So then I'm just going to sort of set it on here like it's growing on the bush. That looks good. Then I'm just going to dab some super glue in there to hold it on there. And our bush is trying to fall off the base here. So I'm just going to dab a little more super glue in there, and I'll put some leaves there just to hold it on. Or not to hold it on, rather to hide the super glue. So I'll just grab a couple leaves real quick. I'll just dot them in there. There we go. Good. Just going to move this leaf. There we go. Alright. So there we go. So now we got our plant, we got some leaves on the ground, and we have our little bush thing coming along here. Let's see what else, what other kind of things we can find. Oh yeah, tufts, of course, tufts. Let's add some tufts. So I'm going to use some of these tufts that sort of look a little bushier than some other tufts might. And then I'll use some of these. So I'm not going to use these. I don't want full grass tufts, but these that sort of look like bushes will go well in our little forest we got going on here. And I've got them in two slightly different colors, so that'll help also. So I'm just going to stick that one there. And then I'll stick one back here. Alrighty. Yeah, about right there, I think. That'll work. Alright, so we're almost done. Just have to put a little bit of paint in a couple places. So I'm going to take the Warp Lightning paint. I'm not sure if I used this or not. No, I guess I didn't use this yet. So I'm going to take the Warp Lightning. And I'm just going to put it onto this plant here. Down in the crevices. Down here at the bottom. And then I'm just going to get my brush wet and then sort of feather this color up the rest of this plant here. There we go. A little too much paint down there. That's okay. Alright. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the backs of these. Doesn't matter as much on the backs because people won't be seeing the back very much. So then I'm just going to take the same Tesseract glow that we used on him a little bit. I'm just going to dot the very edges of our plant with this. The capillary action, I think, no, not capillary action. Adhesion, cohesion, one of them. We'll sort of take the paint down the branches of this. There we go. So now we have 3 defined colors on our leaves there. our little plant. Alright, and then we're going to take some of the... No, we're not. We're going to take some wildwood, which is close to the paint we used on the dirt, but not quite exactly the same. And I'm just going to put it in the middle of these tufts that we did, just to bring them more into reality with the rest of the world here. There we go. Alright. And then, just a couple more steps now. I'm going to take some Gorgrunta fur. It's a reddish-brown color. I'm going to put that on the branches of our little bush here. Just like this. Just give it a little more natural color besides just brown. And if there's a little bit of brown still poking through, that's not a problem. Trees can have different colors on them for sure, so no big deal there. Alright. Then I'm going to take some of the Creed camo from earlier, and I'm just going to dot it into the mesh that we put on top of the bush. Just to give some variation in the color of the bush. The bush is still trying to fall off. So rude. Once everything's dry, I'll tack it down, but for now it'll be okay. Alright, so there's that. So then the last thing to do, so I'm just going to take some aggro stones, and I'm just going to put this on the blade of the sword and the metal, or the handle rather, just to give it a little bit of a worn look, and to bring the silver sort of to a bronze, but not completely. Still want some of the silver to shine through. There we go. Just a little bit there. And then I'm going to do the last thing before the base rim. I'm going to grab some dark brown paint, if I have some handy. There we go. And since we did the dirt in a dark brown, I'm going to just take some dryad bark, and I'm just going to stipple some on the back of his cloak here, like he had been trudging through the dirt and the mud. So I'm going to get some on my brush and get most of it off, and then just sort of stipple it on, working my way up the bottom of the cloak here. Some heavier mud in a couple places. Do that over here. Maybe a little bit on his boot. Alright, and then I'm going to take some of that skin tone that we used to highlight earlier, Kislev Flesh, just because it's a natural color. And I'm going to put just a tiny, tiny bit of it on the edge of the cloak here. Just as a little highlight down here. There we go. And a little bit here. Nothing major, just something. Alright. And then I keep thinking it's the last step, but it's not. I'm going to use some Steel Legion Drab. And I'm just going to get a little bit of this on the bark of the tree here, just to mix up the color and to make it look more like bark. Just stipple it around. There we go. Now the tree has some texture to it. Alright. And the last thing to do will just be to paint a base rim on this thing. I'm going to use Abaddon Black for that. It's my go-to base rim color. Just going to grab him. He should be relatively dry at this point. Alright. There he is done. So, hopefully you learned something about either painting a Dryad / Ranger dude, or maybe just working on a forest base. Or, like I always say, maybe you learned how to not do something. Maybe you saw a technique in here and you're like, no, I could do this better some other way. And if you did, awesome. At least you're learning. But that'll do it for this episode. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you next time.